Coming up next, the Bookening reads the premiere novel, one of the premiere novels by the greatest female novelist of all time, the female Shakespeare.
Jaw herself.
Jaw.
As we call her.
Jaw, as we call her. And that, of course, stands for Jane Austen. And we're reading her immortal classic, Emma! Hey, hello, welcome to the Bookening. My name is Nathan Alberson. I'm your humble and obedient host. I'm joined by Jacob Menzel, the pastor who's a master of reading. How are you doing, Jake? I'm also joined by Brandon Chasteen, the master who's a pastor. What are you?
PhD.
All right, let's talk about Emma.
All right, here we go.
Yay.
Getting right to business, buddy.
If you're listening, which you are, because by the very definition of the word and the fact that you're hearing this, you are. It's just not possible.
Stop, you're doing it again. We talked about this. We did this last time. We just need to get into the book.
Yeah, but I just wanted to tell them that if they're listening, what I'm trying to do is get into the book quickly because it took a long time last episode.
They even took the time to download the episode, probably, right? Most people download podcasts now.
Yeah,
or stream.
Or stream. But that takes time, right?
No, they have someone perform them for them. What are you talking about?
You said they're listening to this because they're the listeners.
Right.
And I'm acknowledging that they also must have taken the time to download.
They're not in the room.
They're not in here with us?
No.
Oh.
How do you think podcasts work?
I thought we were like in some sort of
avant-garde theater.
Yeah, like a science theater.
Jim Carrey film.
Yeah. That's those lights, they're not cameras? No. This is not like a Truman Show. People don't watch me while I sleep.
Well,
No.
What say we talk about Emma?
All right.
Let's do this.
All right. Let's do it. Part 2. Well, I guess we're talking about Mr. Knightley now. I realized we never did our, what's that thing?
Baggage check.
We never talked about our baggage check. So just real quick, I like Jane Austen, in case you haven't noticed, and I love this novel, and I loved it the first time, and I loved it this time. That's my baggage.
My baggage is I had only ever read Pride and Prejudice. I came out of Anna Karenina, big, long, slow burn, and wanting and hoping and expecting something instantly engaging, fun, funny, light, and still just as incisive. Just like if you could take Tolstoy's 815 pages and knock it down to 200 and still get all of the exposition,
But funny.
But actually being funny. That's how I think of Austen.
Tall order.
It's a very tall order. So that was my baggage. That's what I was expecting and what I was wanting. And that fed into my disappointment
No wonder
at the
those first
beginning.
8 chapters didn't do it for you.
Yeah, I know, right? It was a really nasty, awful expectations to come to any book with. I freely admit. Once I got to about the time of the painting where Mr. Elton stuff starts to heat up, then I was right back into it.
One of the really weird things about Jane Austen, especially since she wrote her novels over such a condensed period of time, as I understand it, her novels are very different. Like you really can track her progression as an artist and as a person that was perceiving the reality. Pride and Prejudice feels like it's written by a person of a different age and experience than Emma does.
Yeah.
Mansfield Park is a much darker and weirder novel than either one of them, and I'm excited to talk about that maybe next year. And then Persuasion is...
Well, you say that, and I remember when I first started asking you, my assumption was that Pride and Prejudice came later, and it's the exact opposite.
No, it's one of the...
And you see that by the time you get to the end, what you were referencing earlier, just I think you said it was a more mature novel, more mature characterization going on. I think that's true. But I was just, from the craft standpoint, I was like, why is she not bothering to make me invested or care about anybody for so long? Like this, I assumed it was a lack of maturity in her writing, in her artistry that wasn't in Pride and Prejudice. It's from the word go, or at least it was for me.
But actually, it's her not condescending to you.
Yeah, it's her not caring. She's telling you
come up to my
mature
level. I'm not going to throw in 5 jokes in the first chapter just to make you happy.
Yeah, you should just read it because I wrote it.
Right.
I'm telling a more mature story here, and it requires more maturity and patience of you, and so deal with it. And I didn't appreciate that at first, but I grew to love it. So
there you go.
Brennan, your baggage, sir?
My baggage was, this is actually one of the novels I have never read by her, but I've come to trust her. And so I knew it was going to be good. I don't doubt that her books are going to be good. She's like Shakespeare, you know that whatever you're about to read is good. So that's what it reminded me of when you said that every novel was different in tone. Is the only other author that I know of where you cannot guess what the tone of what you're about to read is going to be until you're actually reading it is Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. So it's a wide range of sensibilities.
All right, so that's baggage check. Yay! Mr. Knightley, I found in my research, fellas, that on BuzzFeed's complete ranking of Jane Austen's male hotties, he came in second after Captain Wentworth in Persuasion. They listed his pros as he doesn't back down from a challenge, blunt in a hot way, tolerant of Emma being a complete daddy's girl. Cons, takes his sweet time to get to the point.
Okay. That was useful, thanks.
When were they wanting him to go for her when she was 13?
Yeah, I think he probably should have taken his sweet time to get to that particular point. He outranked Darcy on BuzzFeed's list. Darcy actually came in fourth.
Wow.
One of his pros was listed as Colin Firth emerging from a lake. Thank you, BuzzFeed. So discuss.
Colin Firth emerging from a lake?
No, just, where would you place Mr. Knightley in your ranking of Jane Austen's male hotties?
I think I rank him higher than Darcy.
I would.
Because I think that, like we've been saying about this novel, or at least I think that we're beginning to say about this novel, he's a more mature version of Darcy.
He's a mature, and I think he's I don't want to say better man, but a more mature man. So maybe it's the difference between a 40-year-old and a 25-year-old or whatever Darcy is.
I'm not sure that he's a more mature man, but his characterization is more mature. You don't really get enough of Darcy.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. That's a good way to put it.
And so what you get of Knightley is way better than what you get of Darcy. I would easily put him.
Well, the section I keep thinking about of Darcy, and it's a really sweet section from Pride and Prejudice, but it's just, you only hear about it through Lizzie hearing the stories, is when they go to Pemberley. Is that the name of Darcy's house? Mm-hmm. They go to Pemberley. She visits it. Lizzie's there by herself. She's with the servant, and the servant starts to describe what a wonderful guy Darcy was, and it's a real wake-up call, and it's a sweet moment where you realize, and Lizzie has that interior monologue where she thinks, here's a man who so many people's happiness depends on, and he's making them all happy. Where you hear that described, and Lizzie hears the anecdote about it, you actually see that with Knightley. You see him be that dude who's just a real pillar of his community. And my understanding is that given his rank and his status, he would actually be the magistrate of this community or something like that. And you see him kind of bear that responsibility for everyone.
Yeah, you see him with his servants. You see him with Robert Martin. You don't actually see him with Robert Martin, but you get that little story, that little insight. And then you think, yeah, this is the kind of man that Lizzie hears that Darcy is.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That we hear second, third hand that Darcy is.
We never see it.
But we get to see it in Knightley.
Yeah, that's all he does is, he had the hots for Emma, but just making friends with and visiting boring old Mr. Woodhouse. It's like...
Even I'm sorry to interrupt you, but even Darcy's relationship and care for his sister. Mm-hmm. Not to make this weird, but you could make a case that we actually see that in Knightley's care for Emma until the point where the romance.
Yeah, but I'm willing to give Mr. Knightley the benefit of a doubt here and say that whether the romance bloomed or not, whether he felt any attraction or not, he's doing a really good duty by Emma and by Mr. Woodhouse. That just comes out of his principled character.
Yeah.
Just his ability to hang out and play games or whatever with boring old
comes
Mr.
over
Woodhouse.
Every day because he knows that poor Emma's going to be by herself and Mr. Woodhouse needs the company and needs a trusted friend.
Yeah.
It's just part of his responsibilities. He's got this aging, self-pitying, hypochondriac widower and his spoiled daughter that somebody should be looking after them and be around them. And he goes around and he does all kinds of stuff like that.
Right, yeah, he will visit the Bateses, whatever he needs to do. It actually, in a weird way, it makes you appreciate what was probably good about that landed gentry. You always in these novels wonder, like, did they have jobs? What did they do? But you understand Mr. Knightley could actually spend his whole day doing good thing after good thing after good thing, making a lot of people's lives better who rely on him. So I put him number 1 in my list of Jane Austen's male hotties.
I only have 2 to choose from, so he's my number 1.
He's your number, Brandon?
I think he's my number 1 too.
Well, there you go. Even with Colin Firth emerging from the lake.
Probably
We could just get a scene of Knightley emerging from a lake.
If only.
If only. Jane Austen let us down on that one.
Is it Jeremy Northam who
Jane
plays in the
Austen let
movie?
everybody down on Darcy too.
She did. But the good old, it wasn't the BBC, but the good old filmmakers did not let us down on that one.
She did not describe that for us.
No. Well,
Colin Firth, too. That's just funny. That has become such...
what else do we want to say about Emma? Is she a feminist hero, guys?
Yes.
I mean, she makes her own destiny. She's not going to get married. She's proactive in love. She brings people together.
She's not proactive in love.
Oh, she's proactive in...
Doing her own thing. I mean, I think that everything that would make her a feminist icon is what Jane Austen sees as making her foolish. So,
So maybe she is a feminist icon. Doesn't matter. Well, here's the reason I have to.
nevertheless, she persisted.
Right.
And then she grew up and became a lady.
Right.
Which is what all you feminists should, I don't know, maybe aspire to.
Yep.
Elizabeth Warren, our 40, some odd president of the United States, probably.
My dear, everybody is a feminist until they grow up and mature.
I feel stupid asking the question of whether Emma's a feminist hero, but the introduction to my novel, which I failed to bring, I've got a jank copy from our library, but it says that, I wish I'd brought it, but the introduction to my novel, written by a scholar, a modern scholar, says that the introducer, the person that's writing the introduction, is perplexed and saddened and does not know how to feel about the ending, because the ending is Emma giving up her free will. The ending is Emma settling into domesticity, and she doesn't know whether Jane Austen is actually portraying that as a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, I mean, I can help out our poor perplexed scholar.
I'll help her out.
Jane Austen is portraying it as a good thing.
Is she?
Yeah.
Our poor perplexed scholar needs to go back to grammar school.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that it's a very good thing.
But if you read between the lines,
Oh, I guess, yeah. If you smoke enough pot, I guess, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, if you need to justify your academic career by inventing fictions out of 500-year-old pieces of literature, then maybe.
That's just, it's so frustrating about the new way, the way that scholarship has gone, even in some...
It's only 300 years old, but...
What?
I said it was 500 years old.
Oh, this? What? This podcast?
Yeah, that's...
Monkey Sue's uncle?
Proceed.
I'm confused now.
It's so frustrating where scholarship...
Oh, yeah. I forget what I was going to say. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Well, we need a scholarship rant right here.
Remind me what we were...
Oh, this stupid author that was reading between the lines.
It's frustrating because all new scholarship thinks that it has to be inventive and creative with the way that they're thinking and theories that they're coming up with. When at one point, all that scholarship was, it was preserving knowledge and making sure that people understood the knowledge that had been preserved and handed down, and it was seen as was conservative, and now it has to be
innovative
and open, and so soon
progressive.
And the only way for that to go is stupidity and insanity, because eventually you have to start saying really dumb things, and so then you get people starting to talk about how you have whole committees devoted to ecology in literature and machinery in literature, and how we're cyborgs somehow by the act of reading, and you just want to tell them all to shut up. It's just, you guys are in your ivory castle that nobody cares about. Mm-hmm. So,
well, the classic terrible Jane Austen essay in my mind is the one by Virginia Woolf, and what Virginia Woolf does is, instead of talking about the novels that Jane Austen actually wrote, she says Jane Austen died when she was 42, but if she'd lived, let's think about some of the novels that she would have written. And then Virginia Woolf proceeds to actually make arguments about Jane Austen based on these hypothetical novels that Virginia Woolf thinks that Jane Austen would have written if she'd lived, but that Jane Austen did not in fact live or write because she died. And it's just like...
If Jane Austen would have lived a little longer and she would have come to as mature an understanding of the world as I have, and would have embraced my worldview, and then her novels would have taken the shape of my worldview. And this, therefore, vindicates and justifies my worldview.
Yeah, it's actually
Booyah.
the exact same approach people take towards Flannery O'Connor. So she wrote these weird short stories that blew up the world at the time that she was writing them. Everybody liked them, but they really didn't want to like them. And then she said these things about how, well, yeah, I'm actually writing about your sin and judgment, and you're going to die, and you're going to have to face God. And all the academics were like, but they're still good stories. We have to somehow justify the fact that we like it. And then so one way they do it is just imagine what she would have written had she not died at 35.
So if you're a woman writer, the moral is you need to live until you're about 90 so that no one can speculate about the kinds of things that you would have written. Well, it's hard for me to play devil's advocate for the sake of discussion because I have no idea where this scholar is coming from, but I just think it's worth mentioning that a respected scholar in an introduction published by a major publisher, I think I've got a Penguin, I'm not sure what edition I have of the novel, but their introduction is all about how if we read between the lines of the novel, we can see Jane Austen subverting the very things that it seems to me that she celebrates. Maybe I'm stupid and I just don't understand Jane Austen as well as the new critics and the scholars and stuff, but it seems like this novel kind of celebrates like the patriarchy and marriage and authority for men and stuff.
The place that I've seen this sort of criticism most with Emma is with Jane Fairfax. Mm. And people like to talk about how she was at this place where she could either choose being a governess, which was degrading, or she could choose to marry this playboy, Frank Churchill, which is degrading. And so actually what those critics will do is they'll take Frank Churchill and make him out, and they'll take him and put him in their monster squad. And so
clever.
Yeah, so he's awful, and so she has to go and marry the monster so she doesn't have to go and become a governess. So she was, what's it called? The bull's horns? Some sort of paradox where you have to choose between two evils.
Yes. There is a paradox like that, and I don't remember what it's called.
Anyways, that's where I've seen it mostly, is because she could, like we've talked about, becoming a governess would be a step down in society for her. So she has to then go and marry this guy who flirts with every woman he comes across.
Well, we're jumping around a little bit here, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about what, if anything, Jane Austen is because everybody. It's easy to say I don't even want to bother disabusing the feminist critics of their notions because to me they're just ridiculous. But what a lot of otherwise sensible people do say about Jane Austen is that her novels are all about class and about money. It doesn't seem to me that that's correct. I'll go ahead and give the answer before I give the test or give my answer. But this novel probably, of all her novels, comes the closest to having something like what everybody tends to think Jane Austen is about, which is about a woman's place in society and how she could maneuver that and manipulate that and how people could work within the class systems. And everybody always assumes it's a veiled criticism of the class system. What, if anything, is Jane Austen saying about class and about her society and its relationship to class in this novel?
Well, if we let Mr. Knightley speak for Jane, which I think he comes the closest to speaking for her, it's that people have a place and it's ridiculous to try and leads to some bad and comedically foolish situations to try and get out of that and ignore it.
I mean, what she's saying about class is that it's a real thing. Deal with it.
Yeah.
Like she's not making an argument against the against class, against the existence of certain classes. She's not even making an argument. I want to say she's not even making an argument for she's simply
like, here it is.
This is the way it is.
What about the heartrending plight of Jane Fairfax, which you do if
Jane
you
Fairfax
feel
is
bad?
an orphan who got taken in by somebody who loved her father and respected him. She was well taken care of. She had nothing. She was cared for. She was well trained. She was well endowed with good gifts by God. And so here she is, the benefactor of just the generosity of everyone around her. And she gets to be positioned as a governess in a great household, or she marries Frank Churchill, who may not be the best man, but turns out he's not as bad as he could be. He's no Mr. Knightley. There's no question about that.
He's also not a Wickham, though.
But he's not Wickham.
Yeah.
He's got his flaws and his sins, and they're real. And we see his he is like Emma. He and Emma are set up as parallels, and he is just as immature as she is, and his perceptions of things are not what they are. And we see that in his letter. He perceived all this stuff and made all these assumptions about what Emma was thinking that weren't true. And I believe that those were his sincere judgments, but he let things go too far. And then he apologizes and he accepts responsibility basically for himself and asks forgiveness. And he's not knightly, but he's maturing too. And it's a good match. I mean,
and in the sense that you want to extend charity to Emma, because if Mr. Knightley, who's such a dude and so cool, sees something in her, there must be something there. If Jane Fairfax sees something in Frank Churchill, there must be something there, because we know Jane Fairfax is beyond compare in her.
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe it speaks well of Frank Churchill that he wants to marry this woman for who she is and not because of any advantage she brings to him. He could have earnestly tried to woo Emma and possibly could have succeeded in earnestly trying to woo Emma and could have gained every advantage by it and pleased his family and everything. But he wasn't actually interested in that. He screwed up with Emma. He was wrong. But Jane was his girl. And so that speaks of he has a harder time overcoming his personality for his principles, but there are principles there. And they're real principles and they're good principles. He doesn't always act on them. He has greater difficulty attaining them. But they're still there and they're still real. And maybe I'm underselling his weaknesses, because now I'm remembering, he goes and doesn't he have a gambling habit and some stuff like that too early on. But I really do think we see a man who's on a parallel path to Emma, who is maturing and who we do see grow and mature by the end of the novel. And his maturation's not complete, and he's clearly not in Emma's class. But yeah, I don't remember how we started, but whatever it was, I'm against it. What were we saying?
I asked you about the plight of poor Jane Fairfax.
Well, yeah, all I was trying to say is that, sorry, here I go again. All I was trying to say is she's not in any way disadvantaged. She's had the misfortune of losing her parents and there being nobody to take care of her, and accept that she's taken care of. And it is unfortunate that somebody of her abilities is looking at the possibility of becoming a governess. But you know what? She doesn't end up that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jane Austen's perfect moral imagination allows Jane Fairfax to escape the horrible fate. I mean, you do have to deal with the fact, I think, that it's portrayed as something of a horrible fate, that all the other characters and Emma herself thinks, isn't it a tragedy? They're talking about it like she's going to be sold into slavery or something like that.
And it's Miss Elton who's championing it.
Yeah, Miss Elton, the horrible Miss Elton is...
Miss Elton needs to keep Jane Fairfax down because she exposes how bankrupt she is as a lady, as an accomplished lady.
So I think that is the closest that you could come to making an argument that Jane Austen is criticizing the caste system of her society. But then you have to bring Harriet into it, and you have to compare Harriet to Jane, and I think that's when it gets interesting.
Yes, because Harriet's happiness is ending right back where she should have been in the first place.
Right.
And that's the comedy is. And I mean, in that sense, it's a very classical comedy form. You have the peasants and the lower class ending up with the lower class in a happy marriage, and the upper class ending up with the upper class in a happy marriage, and the comedy comes from mixing the two and seeing what happens. But in the end, oil and water don't mix, and they go back to where they're supposed to go, and everything's happy.
And you get to see why.
Yeah, I mean, it's very Shakespearean in that sense.
See, idiots, this is what happens when you try to step out of your place.
Yeah, people who are meant to be miserable are miserable because they marry another miserable person. Like the Eltons.
Water finds its level.
Yeah.
Or like Frank Churchill's step mom, who everybody's just like overjoyed when she dies, and he finally gets everything that she wants.
And there was great rejoicing.
Even all our hero, even Mr. Knightley's making snide comments about how fortunate for him that she died just at the exact right time. I really liked that. So, I mean, do we want to say that Jane Austen actually isn't criticizing the tragedy of Jane Fairfax's potential future is just one of those things that happens, and it's sad, but...
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I think Jake's right that she's not very political. She's just showing you the reality of the world. And where her wisdom and discernment comes in is the way that people, these people are going to behave this way whether or not they're in Britain. Mm-hmm. Their character is going to come out. So if Knightley had been born into a lower class, he would have become a Mr. Martin.
Right.
Right.
And Jane Austen allows for a universe with, like, if she's, like we talked about with Pride and Prejudice, if Jane Austen is the god of this universe, then she creates a universe where water finds its level and where Jane Fairfax isn't stuck. Jane Fairfax is able to move up because that's what she deserves, and Harriet needs to go back down because she's Harriet.
And that there can be there's happiness there.
Yeah.
Not just some happiness.
Happiness comes with embracing your station. Except in part of what we see, the Eltons are not a happy couple, and it's because they're reachers.
Yeah.
They're both reachers, and they're not content with their lot in life.
They feed off each other.
And so they're miserable, and they make everybody else around them miserable. Miss Bates, for her flaws, is content with her position, and we see that come out too, and ends up being a really sweet thing. Harriet finds her place.
Well, the final image we get of Harriet is, it says something like, she was with those who would keep her out of trouble and give her what little she needed to do to occupy her mind. It sounds a little bit condescending sort of to modern ears, but it's just like, Harriet was simple, and she just needed a simple, some stuff to keep her happy, and that's what she got, and that's all that some people need, and we don't need to be offended on Harriet's behalf and say that Harriet deserved more and needed to go out there and assert her place in society or whatever.
It's saying some interesting things that apply to a lot of our modern situation, like the liberals. They all want to, I don't know, man, not everything is equal. That's the lesson that Jane Austen wants us to see, or not even a lesson she's trying to teach us. It's just the way that she sees the world. Is not everyone.
It's what we would focus on because it's so alien to the way that we've been taught, the way that our own societal structure is built.
Yeah, everyone can become president, and everyone has the right to try.
You can be whatever you want to be.
And it's just stupid because everybody in the back of their mind knows that some people are a Harriet Smith.
Right. A simple, artless, amiable girl, as I think Mr. Knightley calls her, and it's a compliment.
Whatever you think of Hillary Clinton, she was never a Harriet Smith.
No.
Right.
Yeah, she was probably a Lizzie gone bad or something, gone sour, something.
Whatever you think of Donald Trump, he was never a Mr. Martin.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that people have different personalities and different giftings that have been given to them, and it's a nasty lesson. We don't like to hear it, but you see it all over the place. And it's not just the liberals; the conservatives do it too.
Oh yeah.
So.
Everybody believes that we're all created equal, and da-da-da-da-da. But what about Mrs. Elton as what's that?
No, I was about to do another jab at classical education.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I can't. I don't want to talk over that.
Every child can be made great if they just learn some Latin.
If they just learn some Latin, yeah. And do some paper mache.
Yeah.
I'll just ask the question from Twitter. Does Mr. Woodhouse belong on our monster squad?
No.
Nice too.
Just kind of harmless and lame.
He's not harmless.
He's selfish.
He is very selfish.
And if we want to blame, just like we blamed Mr. Bennett for anything wrong with his wife or daughters, I think we can squarely, and I think Austen intends for us to squarely lay the blame for any flaws that Emma may have at the fact that her mom is dead. She doesn't even hardly remember her. Her governess was more of a best friend, and her dad was just a weird hypochondriac that didn't do anything.
Yeah, but I think that's and a broken man who couldn't bear the pain of widowhood, or being a widower, rather. I think that the reason why I don't want to dignify Mr. Woodhouse with the
appellation,
with induction into our monster squad, is that it's set up from the very beginning that.
Sorry.
Brandon just kicked his boots up on the table.
I got it.
It's very Texas.
It's just a cramp induced. Keep going.
The reason I don't want to give him, I don't want to dignify him with that, is that it's set up for us from the beginning that there are multiple contributing factors in why Emma is the way she is. She has a pathetic widower of a father who couldn't handle. She never had a mother, and if her mother had been, but she wasn't, maybe dad wouldn't, but he wasn't. And then the governess ended up being, sister, best friend, and so she was failed by a lot of people, and then she has her own natural flaws that just haven't had opportunity to be exposed. Everywhere she goes, there's only one person that sees her for what she is. In the world, only one person that sees her for what she is. Everywhere she goes, she's flattered. Everywhere she goes, she's spoiled and coddled. And so you don't get a picture. It's not given to you the way I think Mr. Bennett's given to you, as it's really his fault, guys. Like, yeah, Mr. Woodhouse is responsible. Yeah, he's answerable. Yeah, it's his fault. Yeah, he should be. But there are reasons given why he couldn't, and some of them are his sins and selfishness. And then there are lots of other.
Well, I think what you might, if I can maybe put words in your mouth, or if I can just say my own words that interact with the words that you just said.
That's probably better.
That's okay. What I hear you saying, Jake, is, or maybe I don't hear you say, what I'm going to say after much preface is that, and I'm going to lose this train of thought as I just jabber on.
Okay, I'll pick it up. Mr. Bennett had the ability.
That's what I was going to say. Wait, let me put the words in your mouth.
Okay,
these are the words I was going to put. Mr. Bennett was damnable because he was capable of doing better. He was capable of doing well. He was smart. He was acerbic. He saw everyone clearly. Mr. Woodhouse is just an idiot. I mean, he's just like a broken. He's not capable.
It's sort of like
anything.
if you killed off Mr. Bennett and had those girls growing up in Mrs. Bennett's house. It's a similar situation. He doesn't have the tools. He's still responsible. But he's not nearly as damnable as Mr. Bennett, who's not only responsible but capable, and not just responsible and capable, but actively harmful. Mr. Woodhouse is passively harmful and is not competent and capable of doing what needs to be done for a lot of different reasons. And so there's just this sense in which we're talking about two different levels, two different planes here. Should he be more capable and competent? Yeah.
You can't quite let him off the hook.
You can't let him off the hook. If he wasn't so self-absorbed, selfish, and self-pitying, if he could get his way to
caboose.
say
his head out of his backside.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. If he could get his head out of his backside long enough to see he has a daughter that he has to care for and discipline, and he needs to attend to her sins and her flaws, and maybe his governess is actually a miserable failure. One way or another, he needed to take responsibility, but he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't have it
right
in him to do that. So I don't think is he villainous? Yeah. But he doesn't rise to the level of Mr. Bennett in villainy.
Earlier you said that Mr. Bennett scoffed. He just sat there and laughed.
He laughed. He thought it was funny.
So that means right there.
He put his wife out there and exposed her to ridicule because he thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
He let his girls run around and act the fool because he thought it was funny, and he was just like, no, they'll get over it in time, maybe. And it bit him. But that's malevolent. That's actively harmful. Mr. Woodhouse isn't actively harmful. The closest you can get to him being actively harmful is his flattery of Emma. Emma's you're just the best. You're always right.
But even there, it's not him thinking like, I will flatter her to get something. It's him just honestly thinking she's the best. I mean, he lacks the mental or emotional capabilities to see things accurately. And unfortunately, some people do. And it's not that they're not responsible before God, but there's a big difference between choosing not to do something and just kind of lacking the equipment for it.
And he's emotionally handicapped. I don't know. I'm not a widower, but I tremble to think what would happen to me if something happened to my wife, and what kind of father would I become without her? It's just, you have to make some allowance there too, I think.
Yeah. And there again, we can be guided by the impeccable judgment of Mr. Knightley, who seems to have affection for the man and certainly for his daughter. Mm-hmm. No, certainly for the daughter. He's been watching her since she was 13 years old, as we know. I guess we might as well talk about that. I don't know what to say. Is it creepy? Should we be creeped out?
Oh, we already kind of discussed it.
I guess we already talked about it. Did we already talk about that?
We decided the way that
it was handled about as well as it could possibly be.
Yeah.
Mr. Darcy, given that he fell in love with a 13-year-old, Mr. Knightley acquitted himself admirably. Is that what we're going to say?
He didn't pursue her. In fact, he never really pursued her. So
I honestly, he says that, but you get the impression that he had a special regard for this girl. He didn't let it get any farther than that in his mind. He just had a special regard for her, and it matured as she matured.
Yeah, I think he didn't really think of it as love until jealousy entered the picture with Frank Churchill.
And you have to allow Mr. Knightley to be a good man. That's the other thing that this person in my introduction was very uneasy with, was Mr. Knightley's whole deal. I mean, I think the introducer says something like, was Mr. Knightley just waiting for Emma to become nubile? And it's like, no, actually, that's not how Mr. Knightley was thinking about it, because Mr. Knightley's not a creep like you, introducer.
No, I think you're right. I don't think he was. I think that...
Just like that. I thought that was all you were going to say.
Yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
You're right.
No, I do think that the entrance of Frank Churchill is where it became love. Until then, it was, like Jake said, a fond regard.
And I think he can look back and see that fond regard was the seed of what became his love for her. And he can say, I've loved you since you were 13. But I don't think it has to be more than that. I mean, I will say that I had a fond regard of my wife before I ever had any. I was a senior in high school and she was in 8th grade. And I thought, man, that girl is really something. Yeah. I like that girl a lot. She'll make somebody a great wife someday. It completely innocently not even ever occurring to me. You know, I was a senior in high school. I was attracted to girls that were my age. And, but then, time happened. And my then 14-year-old girl that I had high regard for grew into a woman that I loved. Yeah. And so, I can look back and say the seeds were there.
Right. So the lesson of this novel, I guess, is that as a 30-year-old man, I should find a broken young woman and try and fix her. And if it works out well, I should wife her, right?
Yeah.
That's what Jane Austen wanted me to take away from this, right?
Yep. Nathan, you got it.
Jake's not going to even dignify that one with an answer. Let's see here. Gosh, is there anything else we need to discuss besides the big monster question? I feel like we should be able to get hours out of this book, but we really have covered most of everything I wanted to talk about.
I can't think of anything else that I want to talk about.
It's great talking about Austen. She makes it so simple because you just get to talk about each character.
Right.
Yeah.
You spend time with each character and then you're done, because it's all about the characters and their development or revelations about their true character that happen over the course of the novel. And then she sews a nice little bow on it at the end, and that's what you've got. And your job as a reader is to figure out how you can become a better man or a woman as you see yourself in each of the characters.
To read them
or fail
rightly.
to see yourself in each of the characters.
Right. Well, I thought this novel, I think, has a particularly nice example of that in Miss Bates, who, if you've read your Austen, if you've read Pride and Prejudice, you're kind of trained to just think, oh, here's another one of Austen's obnoxious stock idiots. Here's another fool for us to make fun of. And I think this is maybe a mark of maturity in Austen's writing and thinking that you don't see so much in Pride and Prejudice. Miss Bates is allowed to be very ridiculous, very foolish, funny, stupid character, but then there's some real sweetness and pathos to her that comes in.
Yeah, it is a sad scene when Emma says that thing about her.
The way that she responds is beautiful. Yeah. And
when she's,
and
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, you were going to explain it.
You mean when Emma makes the snide comment?
Yeah,
about
and
it,
she just says, "Oh yes, I see now. I see your full meaning. I am a very ridiculous person." And then she goes on, and of course she can't stop talking about it because she's Miss Bates and she just talks. But how good it is of Emma to have put up with her, to condescend to her so much when she's so what's the word,
ridiculous or whatever.
Yeah, when she's so ridiculous.
And you realize she's not stupid. I mean, she is stupid, but she's not. She knows she's obnoxious.
It's a much more.
She's not Mr. Collins,
or Mrs. Bennet. I think Austen gives us more compassion for her than she does for Mrs. Bennet, who's a very similar kind of character. But she really shoves your nose in the obnoxiousness of Miss Bates and makes you feel with Emma.
Makes you listen to all those speeches for page after page
after page after page, and it's so annoying. And then she gives you a really great payoff that that scene happens, and Emma says what you think, and then that leads to the great scene of the novel,
right?
And all of that, it's just a great payoff. All of that putting up with Miss Bates for page after page after page pays off in a really great scene. And Miss Bates gets to come out looking sweeter for it. Mm-hmm. And Emma then has to go and humble herself. And
Yeah, that scene, that section of the novel is as moving to me as anything in Pride and Prejudice, I will say. Maybe it's not ultimately of as much consequence in the characters' lives in some sense, but
It is for Emma.
yeah.
It is her transformation. That's what marks her coming of age.
I mean, you really love Mr. Knightley when you just like, what a dude there. I mean,
yeah, if there's a place in the novel I'm going to cry, it's there.
I did a little bit, actually, just a little, but I knew it was coming. I think probably it being the second time helped with the crying. It was very relatable, for one thing. I mean, like, I've had that situation of my mouth running off with me, or just doing or saying something where you're just like a Looney Tunes character that's run off a cliff and suddenly you realize you're hovering in midair and then you fall down, and or you say something and do something and you don't even realize how terrible it is until somebody like Mr. Knightley points it out, and then suddenly you're crushed by it and suddenly you're mortified by it. You will go the rest of your life, you won't be able to think of it without pain. And yeah,
Had those moments. But so to bring it all back around also to class and what she's saying about things and why it's uncomfortable for us today is because what we don't like, especially about hierarchy, is that it tells us that we have responsibility. If there's hierarchy, there is responsibility. And there's also humility, and there's obedience and all this. And this all comes out in why Mr. Knightley can make Emma feel so ashamed of what she's done. Because she abused Mrs. Bates. She abused Miss Bates with her position over her. So
the line, what was something like what was cause for your contempt should have been cause for compassion.
yeah,
Oh man,
it's just
talk about the dagger.
I know.
yeah.
Oh, what's the exact line?
We're just gonna have to look it up. I think it's chapter 43, I believe.
How could you be so insolent in your wit to a woman of her character, age, and situation?
You whom she had known from an infant, who she had seen grow up from a period when her notice was an honor. That's just like, to have you now in thoughtless spirit and the pride of the moment, laugh at her, humble her, and before her niece too, and before others, many of whom would be entirely guided by your treatment of her.
Her situation should secure your compassion. It was badly done, indeed.
It was badly done. Yeah. That the way that guy pulls that line off in the Gwyneth Paltrow scene you showed me earlier, I really liked it.
That's good.
That's actually a good version.
He's a good Mr. Knightley.
It's worth seeing. You should watch the Gwyneth
Badly
Paltrow.
done, Emma.
Yeah, much better than that dork in the other version. Badly done.
It's that little whisper at the end.
Yeah.
It's like, nicely done, actor.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
He's a good Mr. Knightley.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I want to go watch that version.
You should.
now.
It's good, and Gwyneth Paltrow's good actually.
I started to bring it up on iTunes, and the clip that they played was very discouraging. She's sitting there at the table with her dad, and it's weird and awkward, and then they look out the window, and there's Knightley.
Well, it's not all like that.
I was like, I don't know that I want to watch
I'd actually
this.
say that most of the characters, the actors they choose, are really good in that
We
movie.
got Alan Cumming as Mr. Elton. He's good.
The lady that plays Harriet Smith is good.
Yeah, Miss Bates is, as you probably
She's-
saw in that clip, was good.
Who's she the mother from?
Well, I have seen, according to the back of my Barnes & Noble Classics book, one of the great adaptations of Emma,
Which is
Clueless.
Oh, yeah.
Clueless. I have never seen Clueless.
I have not either.
I've seen Clueless.
Brandon, I'm glad you've never seen Clueless, because I thought I was the only person in the world that had never seen Clueless. So how does it live up to Jane Austen's immortal tale, Clueless?
I'm afraid it doesn't live up to
Doesn't it? That's a disappointment.
Surprise.
The plots and storylines are all the same, except that Frank Churchill turns out to be gay.
Oh, well, hey.
None of them are named properly except for Elton. Elton's his first name.
They don't call him Mr. Knightley.
It's Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd is Mr. Knightley.
Oh, Paul Rudd is
Really?
I didn't realize he was old enough to have been in Clueless.
I guess I could see Paul Rudd as Knightley. As a hipster, postmodern version of Knightley.
Yeah, he's a college student.
Is Emma a high school student?
He's pre-law. No, he's not even.
She's in elementary school still.
Forget the ages, right?
She's like a senior in high school, and he's like a law student. And her dad is actually pretty. There is that kind of weird, creepy element to it, which is her dad's had like 3 or 4 marriages, and his mom was one of them from a different marriage. So he is Emma. What's her name in the movie?
Alicia Silverstone. No.
Yeah,
Is it?
That's the
I've never seen it. I don't know.
Anyhow, it's like Claire or something like that. Anyhow, he's her former stepbrother.
But they don't have any blood in common.
They don't have any blood in common, and they don't have a legal relationship anymore. But what happens is her dad's like a high-powered attorney, and he's in law school, so he's like always hanging out, trying to avoid his mom or his new stepmom, or I don't know what. He's like reading Nietzsche and stuff like that. But is also always there for Emma, like, you know, she gets stranded after a party, and creepy Elton, who she's trying to set up with Harriet, comes on to her in the car, and she gets out and gets mugged, and he goes and rescues her or something like that, you know.
Oh, so they mix up the Harriet scene with...
Yeah, the bandits. And
that's a weird scene.
that gypsy scene, yeah.
No, they actually do the gypsy scene, though. The gypsy scene happens at the mall when they're at the mall. The Harriet character is flirting with some guys. They're flirting with her, and it looks like, oh, she's, you know, getting some real attention, and then suddenly they'll like tip her over the side. You know, it's like a multi-level mall.
And, that's scary.
Whoever, the Emma character is there with her gay friend who she doesn't know yet is gay, or maybe she does at this point. No, they're like shopping together or something, and he's like, you know, got sweet style, just her tastes and all that sort of thing. And then he runs over and is like, "You jerks, you know." And it's got its sweet elements to it, but yeah, it doesn't
quite live up to it.
When you can I explain that I never voluntarily have watched that movie in my life? It's just a consequence of circumstance.
Well, great, Jake. Thanks for telling us about your favorite movie of all time.
Leave an edit point so we can get into that comment, make it sound like you just... Well, that confrontation scene's sure pretty awesome. And anybody else want to say anything about that?
Nope.
It's a good scene. Mr. Knightley's pretty awesome, and
he's a hunk.
He's a hunk, yeah. One of BuzzFeed's top hotties. No, I don't. I think that scene moves me personally because I've been there. I've had that moment where somebody just takes the blinders off of your eyes, and you realize you go from in 1 second not thinking that you're the most horrible piece of slime that's ever to walk the earth, and then 1 second later the blinders are off and you're like, oh, I'm the most horrible piece of slime to ever walk the earth, and it's just an awful feeling.
Yeah.
But then you love the people that actually do discipline you like that. If you're a wise and mature person like I am, you do at least. Let's see if there's anything else in my notes I want to talk about before we get to the big question. Let's see, we covered BuzzFeed, right?
Oh yeah.
Can't leave BuzzFeed uncovered. It's a dirty job, as somebody had to do it.
Yep. Did we talk about the Eltons enough? Mrs. Elton sure was dumb, huh?
If there's anybody that you actually want put in their place, it's not so much Miss Bates as it is Mrs. Elton.
Yeah.
My goodness.
She doesn't get that scene, though.
No, she doesn't.
She does get humiliated by the whole fact of Emma Knightley happening, right?
Yeah, and she also, I guess, kind of gets humiliated when Mr. Knightley dances with Harriet.
Maybe we should take pleasure in the fact that it was beneath Knightley and Emma and Austen to even bother with Mrs. Elton. It's
right.
Sort of damning in itself.
Oh, but yeah, Mrs. Elton's just not worth it. I mean, Lady Catherine, of course, you got to have the scene where Lizzie tells it to her and, you know, everybody cheers, you know, big. That's a fist pumper of a scene. Mrs. Elton's not even worth that, really, I don't think.
She's just there to be nasty and petty. A lot like Bingley's sister.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if she had any of the things that she pretends to have, then she would be worthy of a takedown.
Now, would we be willing to say that Emma's maybe a little bit unfair to Mrs. Elton? Not that Mrs. Elton isn't terrible, because she is, but Emma makes allowances for the people that she likes to cross class boundaries in a way that she's pretty hard on Mrs. Elton's really not doing anything that Mrs. Weston doesn't sort of do, maybe. I don't know if the comparison quite works, but Emma doesn't mind the Westons in putting together a party for her to come to because she likes the Westons, but she does feel like every possible place where she could accuse Mrs. Elton of crossing boundaries, she will.
I think there's some prejudice there on Emma's part, obviously. You're going to be more likely to hate the people that are hateable. And everything they do is going to bother you and rub you the wrong way. So I just think there's...
Emma tips her hand to that. She tries to, at some point, come up with a justification that, you know, when good people do dumb things, then it's okay. And when stupid people do stupid things, then it's not. Yeah. So, like, she says something like that, basically, at a certain point. Yeah. That's probably, maybe a really bad paraphrase.
Silly things do cease to be silly if they are done by sensible people people in an impudent way.
There's more to it than that, right?
Well, that's the only part of the quote I could find.
I think it's the gist.
Yeah, that's the gist is.
Shut up, Emma.
Shut up. I have to say, this will be our segue into the monster section. I do find some of Emma's sins to be quite relatable and almost lovable in their, like, I've been there quality. And I think maybe that's what Jane Austen was getting at when she says a character that no one but myself will like, is Jane Austen probably had a...
Just like you.
Yeah, she had a decent amount of sympathy for her. I really like that scene where she and Jane Fairfax both play the piano, and she realizes that she should have been applying herself for the last 15 years, and she goes home and practices for 2 hours, rigorously for a couple hours, like as if she's one of those guys that like works out the day before he goes to the beach so that his muscles will supposedly have a little sheen to them. Actually, I find Emma's whole relationship to Jane Fairfax to be funny and relatable. I mean, I think maybe I won't say we've all had it, but I know I've had those people in my life where I know they're good people. I know they're the best people. I know they're people that would be good for me to cultivate a relationship with. My friends and my family tell me, oh, you should, and I just don't like them for whatever reason. And part of what I don't like about them is their goodness, their wholesomeness for me, the fact that I should be friends with them instead of the cool people that I want to be friends with,
The fact that I could be just as awesome as you if I applied myself, but I didn't, so I can't. So, yeah. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have such a high opinion of myself.
Well,
so that's your caveat heading into it?
That's my caveat. We'll see where I land. We'll see where you guys land. It's time to put this question. And remember, Kara Hobbs's continued listening to this podcast hinges on our answer, gentlemen.
When I'm thinking about this...
Oh, wait, let me just ask the question, because I don't know if our readers remember the last episode where the question is Emma Woodhouse going to be inducted along with... Has anyone been inducted for 2000? Yes. Anna Karenina was inducted a couple episodes ago. Nobody from our poetry episodes was inducted, but perhaps some people should have been.
There was one that has a secret place in our Monster Squad.
Yes, the writer of the Forbidden Poet of the Forbidden Poetry that we did not read. He and or she is in our Monster Squad, but you still don't know who she is, dear listener.
And you never shall.
And you never shall, and you'll always wonder. Is Emma going to go into our Monster Squad, gentlemen?
The way I'm thinking about it, she has a lot of sins that are sins of youth, and it makes you really hate her at the beginning, but no more than you hate a lot of teenagers. And she matures and she grows up.
When you were a teenager.
Yourself. Yeah, exactly. Like you were saying, you relate a lot to this stuff and to people who are godly in your life, and you're just like, I'm not going to have anything to do with you because you make me feel bad. And then she matures, and Mr. Knightley has a high esteem of her, and she does have a liveliness and a wit to her, and you see as she matures what Knightley probably sees in her. And so, like Mr. Bennet, immaturity in his youth just stayed with him, and he became a monster because he never outgrew it, and he never got rid of it. And what's her name? Kathy is just a monster. That's what
Kathy from East of Eden.
Yeah, that's what Steinbeck tells us.
Why'd you have to bring her into
there was just
I'm trying to find a way, man.
She was just a monster.
Right. There's a lot of different kinds of monsters that can go in
Robert
the Monster
Jordan,
Squad.
did we introduce him to be inducted?
I think we did say he was part of the Monster Squad because he was just a seducing.
Yeah, but similar to Emma, what Emma had, she outgrew it. Mm-hmm. Either circumstances allowed her to. Jane Austen being a wise manipulator of her universe gave her the opportunity.
Guiding providential hand.
Providential hand.
The
there we go.
Hand of Jane
and then you have Hemingway, who probably himself should be inducted into the Monster Squad. And Anna Karenina, she's
an adulteress that threw herself in front of a train.
Exactly, trying to get these things that she should have matured into realizing she just simply shouldn't have. And so that's my first thought about it.
You're saying poor Emma doesn't belong in that company.
I'm not going to say yet.
Well, you're not going to say, but I'm
throwing that out there.
Okay, throwing that out there. Jake?
Yeah, I think that you could even go farther and say that there's a sense in which Emma's redemption was inevitable because she never had the stuff of monsters, really. She just had her immaturities and sins.
Yeah.
Whether it was the combination of the guiding hand of Providence and Mr. Knightley and her own good sense, she never became the monster that she could have become. As much as I would like to...
Take out your wrath on all those girls you hated in high school, or...
As much as I would like to condemn her to the Monster Squad, I don't think I can do it. I don't think... If we're going to say who's the villain of the book, I can say that Emma's the villain of the book as much as she's the heroine. But
she's also the heroine, and she defeats the
But she's
villain.
also the heroine, and in the end, the heroine wins and gets the guy and is right to. So none of our monsters have been redeemed, right?
No.
Anna threw herself in front of a train. Rudyard Kipling, I guess, was our monsters.
Anna had the little flicker of doubt that she was doing the right thing right before
the train.
She was sliced in two.
Lady Macbeth.
Lady Macbeth, she wasn't redeemed, but she felt bad.
Dracula.
This is some monster squad.
Scrooge was redeemed, yes.
But he really wasn't in the monster
I
squad.
don't think we
Did we induct
bother
him?
to put him in the Monster
No.
Squad. He's a class. I mean, he is a
He's a classic villain. When you say
villain.
when you say don't be like Scrooge, you're not saying don't be like a nice, redeemed, cheerful man. You're saying don't be like a grumpy guy.
But if you were going to say don't be like Emma, you'd mean don't be an immature brat who
Right.
Yeah.
When one thinks of Emma as a type, one thinks of the
faults
proud,
that she has to
spoiled
overcome.
brat, high school student type character, and or homeschooled person. Knew some homeschool peep kit girls like Emma, I have to say, guys.
Oh, yeah. Lots of them.
Yeah, they're proud of they're homeschooled, so
Hopefully they don't all fancy themselves to have turned out like Emma.
to have turned out like Mrs. Knightley. Well, I thought Jake was going to make a big deal out of her being a monster.
I was going to try, but I don't really.
She doesn't. I don't think she does deserve it. I mean, I think you could argue that even at the beginning of the novel, her intentions are always good, which is not something you could really say about most of our monsters. She wants to bring people together. She wants to take Harriet under her wing. She's doing it in a proud, stupid, immature, spoiled brat way, but she doesn't mean anybody any harm for what that's worth. She needs to grow up.
Whereas Kathy meant some harm.
When she killed her parents.
Yeah, when she Dracula meant some harm, I think, maybe one could argue. When she split open his chest and made some woman drink of it. I think he was doing that maliciously, that guy.
So I think
It's just, yeah. I mean,
even after Harriet, I have this quote here somewhere. After the first thing with Mr. Elton, Emma says, "The first error and the worst lay at her door. It was foolish, it was wrong to take so active a part in bringing any two people together. It was adventuring too far, assuming too much, making light of what ought to be serious, a trick of what ought to be simple. She was quite concerned and ashamed, and resolved to do such things no more."
until she turns around and tries to do
She turns
it right
around
again.
and does it again, but who can't relate to that? I bet John Donne could relate to that. I mean, I've been there. I was young once. You guys were young. You did stupid things, and you said, "I'm not going to do that
Not
stupid
me,
thing."
Never.
Okay.
I've never.
Brandon,
I've never
you were
had
young
that.
once.
I was young once. I did stupid things.
Right, Jake was just always Mr. Knightley.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was born this way.
Right. Born this way. Jamma, 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 born this way.
Some people are born to be pastors.
Yeah.
The rest
That's
of
obviously
us,
why he's a pastor and we're not.
the rest of us have our station.
We had our station. Water finds its level. I think you can even see at the very beginning of the novel when Mr. Knightley's like, "Emma, you're an idiot." And she's like, "No, I'm not." Even in her repartee with him, there's a certain amount of a conscience there. She's annoyed by him telling her to do the right thing, and that speaks well of her. She doesn't just blow him off like she would if she had no conscience. And I think her redemption is really super sweet. Not to be all patronizing about it, but I think the scene where Mr. Knightley busts up and confronts her about Mrs. Bates, and then she's in tears and everything. It's like the fact that she was capable of that level of remorse and of shamefaced repentance.
And then she goes and visits Miss Bates, and then there's another really sweet scene that comes right after that with the hand.
Yeah, Mr. Knightley takes her hand, and it looks like he's going to kiss it, but then he doesn't quite. And, she's sort of embarrassed that Mr. Knightley even finds out, but at the same time, she's like, boy, I'm glad he found out. So it's just really sweet and relatable, and you got to love her. And I sort of, in reading it the second time, I really wasn't all that annoyed by her at all. I mean, I just thought this is the story of a stupid kid. There but for the grace of God go us all, and there but for the grace of God went me.
Yeah, I think my second reading, if I come to it again, will be much different.
Jane Austen she gives us a happy world with a compassionate God in the form of Jane Austen, or in the form of the God that Jane Austen believed in, where sometimes people like that, they're just waiting for a little bit of discipline or the shove in the right direction, and they turn out okay.
So there we have it.
Not a monster. You can keep listening, Kara.
Sorry.
Actually, sorry is a pretty good end line. I don't think we're going to top that. All right. The Bookening today was written by Brandon Chastain. No, it was not. He improvised a good chunk of it. Yeah, he might have written some stuff for his contextual text. But the Bookening person that takes the writing credit is me, Nathan Alberson.
The guy who takes writing credits for improvised podcasts.
For improvised podcasts. That's true. The guy that makes snide comments and
saw that one coming.
with knightly-like strength puts Nathan in his place with great forbearance is Mr. Pastor Jacob Menzel. And Brandon Chastain is here, folks. I'm not introducing him. I'm giving the credits.
Hey, I'm here.
Yeah. And you can look up
Warhorn. We're all still here.
Yeah, we're all still here. And you can go to warhornmedia.com to find lots of great content. You can look up Warhorn Media on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram as @WarhornMedia. You can look me up as @NotFamousNathan on Twitter. You can look up Jake on Twitter as
@JacobMensel, I think.
As @JacobMensel, he thinks. And you can look up Jake on Instagram as @JakeMensel or Jacob Menzel or something like that. Brandon's on Facebook as Brandon Chastain, I do believe. His account might be private. I don't know if you could try friending him if you want to.
Mine's public. Is yours public?
Mine is public. Mine is public as it comes. I'm an open book, folks.
I like to hide.
Brandon likes to hide.
Try to find me.
That's good. You're more like Mr. Knightley, sulking in the corner and judging everyone.
That's me.
I'm
but acting according to your principles, which are better than everyone else's.
Right.
Well, thank you.
And I'm like Mr. Churchill. I'm just like, hey, everybody, look at me.
Except you're not Ewan McGregor in a wig.
He's in a wig. Actually, Brandon,
really?
That's the funniest part of
the Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yeah.
I have never revealed this before, but I'm going to reveal this at the very end of the podcast. If you've listened all the way, folks, I am, in fact, Ewan McGregor in a wig.
He just took it off.
Hello, fellas. It's me, Ewan McGregor.
It's me, Obi-Wan.
It's me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
It's very
so much like
your
him.
voices. Yeah.
Hello, fellas. I can't do it. All right, good night, folks.